For those of you joining for the afternoon session, this is the Urban Design and Architecture Advisory Panel for June 18th, 2026. We're looking at the Mount Clare Junction site today. This is so the first time we're seeing it, it's the initial master plan review. And I know there's some interest in this, so I just wanted to state some of the ground rules here for this panel. This Urban Design and Architecture panel is established in Article 32 of the Zoning Code, Section 4, the development reviews. This is a technical assistance panel to advise development projects of a certain scale on design, urban design, and architecture. The intent here is for the design to go through an iterative process of refinement and moving towards something that serves the city in the best way possible. There's no decision being made today. This is really all advisory. Design review is approved by the Department of Planning, not by the panel itself. So, and typically projects of this size see multiple visits to UDAAP. So this is going to be an iterative process. It's going to take some time. And then the other thing I was going to mention here is that this is open to the public. However, it's not a public hearing. We're not going to take testimony from the public today. But anybody who's interested in the project or has thoughts about advising on the design, you can send those comments to me. I'll make sure that the panel and the design team get those comments. And then there's going to be some engagement forthcoming towards the end of the month. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'll hand it over to Pavlina to introduce the panel, and then Bob, you can take it away and present the project, and we can go from there. So take it away, Pavlina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to UDAAP. It's been a minute since we've had any reviews or presentations. We're absolutely delighted to have you. I'm hoping that this is only the beginning of more work and projects that are happening in Baltimore that we can all work on and enjoy and see built. With that said, thank you, Nick, for the introduction. This is the very first presentation. We're going to be learning a lot about your thought process and how you've gotten to where you've gotten with this. So I urge everyone, patience and a peace of mind as we work through some of this, and it will be an iterative process. I know that the design team will continue to work on this, and we'll continue to see the project as it moves forward through its design phases. With me today are three more panelists: Sharon Bradley, landscape architect, Kevin Storm, and Osborne Anthony, architects and planners. The four of us will review the project, and some of you have been involved in this before, others perhaps not. As a matter of procedure, we'll hand it over to the design team here in a minute. They'll introduce their whole development team, and then please be as succinct as you can be with your presentation. I think we'll have plenty of time after that for Q&A, so we can always go back to any particular slide and unpack specific things. It's more important that we move through it as efficiently as it makes sense. And then finally, towards the end, we'll be able to offer some comments and thoughts and ideas for further development. Without any further ado, I'll hand it over to the design team. Please take it away.
Thank you, Pavlina, and Nick, and everyone. Let me share my screen. Drag this thing over. Okay. So today we're here to introduce Mount Clare Square to the panel. This is the first design meeting with you guys for master plan review. The project was formerly called Mount Clare Junction. The project team is comprised of a couple different people. The developer, Carlisle Development Group, which has been in Baltimore for many, many years, owns additional pieces of property. BCT Design Group is the master planner and architect. The civil engineer and landscape architect is Kimley Horn, and the land use attorney is Joe Woolman from Silverman Thompson. So today I'll be presenting the architectural planning portion of it for the firm. BCT Design Group is based in Baltimore, has a long history of working with this panel and working in the city. And we look forward to your thoughtful comments and your help in making sure we come up with a thoughtful decision and conclusion that would come to fruition at this project. The community is really great, needs a great project for it. And so we look forward to your insightful comments and things. The site is located on the western side of town, kind of between Pratt Street and Pigtown, as highlighted in pink here. We're fortunate to be within and surrounded by great communities such as Carroll Park, Pigtown, Holland's Market to the north and things, and not too far from downtown, as well as the entertainment and sports district, which is in the lower right of the portion. These great neighborhoods are what we're trying to respond to and connect with. And we're trying to be very thoughtful about how we engage with them and have a thoughtful dialogue on what they're looking for. Remember, we're trying to fulfill a need in the community, so it's really important we get that feedback and get that engagement with them as well. Here's a quick diagram. One of the great assets is Carroll Park, which is to kind of the south and west of us. That's kind of connected to our site through the railroad tracks of the B&O. Immediately to the east of us is the B&O Railroad Museum, which is a wonderful asset. We're trying to kind of build upon their progress. I think they were before you guys maybe about a year ago, and have some wonderful things going on. So we're looking to reimagine our property to kind of respond to all the great things that are happening in the neighborhood. Currently, the project is called Mount Clare Junction, as delineated by the red line. It's about 15.7 acres. It's primarily a single level retail commercial center with a little bit of office. It's about a total of 234,000. One of the best assets that's on the property is the Super Fresh Grocer, which the client has worked very hard over the years to stabilize and kind of rebrand as something that fulfills the neighborhood needs. It's characteristically kind of a suburban model that's isolated from Pratt Street, has limited connectability and engagement with the rest of the neighborhood. There's virtually no access off Pratt Street, which is kind of interesting in things. So, and there's a ton of parking as dominated by the car and this very large surface parking lot of almost 617 spaces and stuff. So we're trying to reimagine this. We've got great neighbors, and let me kind of take you through some of these things. Pigtown to our south, kind of a quirky, fun with Washington Boulevard to our bottom left. Very artistic, as I mentioned, Carroll Park connectivity, which is to our south and west as well. And then just a lot of great things going on, a great vibe and up and coming. This is upper left portion is a picture of the Super Fresh grocery store, which is about 40,000 square feet. Going over to the right, this is the community gardens of Pigtown, which is immediately across the railroad tracks. A lot of playground equipments, the B&O, Holland's Market to our north, and then the characteristic two or three story row homes that we see in Baltimore line the adjacent neighborhoods. So it has a wonderful history of being really the origination of the B&O Railroad, where that was formed in 1827 in the city. This facility, the main repair yard, was built in 1851. The shopping center was redeveloped in the late 80s, I believe 1987. So with that, we're really trying to build upon all of the great things that have happened on the site. This is the roundhouse of the B&O. This is currently their property. This is roughly the location of the road between them. And you can see all the great buildings that were on this site as recently as about 1971. Here, in a different area, kind of looking towards the east and north, you'll see the roundhouse here, and this is roughly the outline of our site on the project and stuff. Unfortunately, almost a majority of all this stuff was demolished and stuff. It would have been great to kind of work with the bones, and what a great story that would have been to work with these buildings and do adaptive reuse and stuff. Unfortunately, that's gone. So how do we build and honor the legacy of all the people that worked there and they built things and proud traditions? So now to today, this is kind of the same view and the same layout. B&O's got a lot going on, especially down here in this corner, where they're redeveloping a very thoughtful master plan. So we're trying to take advantage of this asset, as well as some of the other institutions that are just to our north and to our east as well, and kind of come up with a plan that really relates to it. So The interesting thing about this project also, it's very interior oriented. It doesn't have very much access to the outside, and we want to kind of reach out and connect and engage with the neighborhood. The site to the north is off Pratt Street, which is a two-lane road that's headed eastbound. We have circulator bus that's demonstrated in yellow with a stop down here. We also have two bus stops off Pratt Street, one on each side of the road here as well. To the north and to the west is primarily 2- and 3-story townhomes or row homes that front the streets. Interesting situation here on South Carey Street is that these are really garages, alley frontages. For some reason, this really isn't the typical street front. So this is a little bit challenging here. Then we kind of revert back to our traditional inline row homes that front the street. The site is basically flat. This is kind of the high portion, and it slopes down to a low point here at 45. These are the tracks that connect to the B&O facility. So these are raised up here. You get about a 20-foot difference in grade. One of the other things too that we found out in the site was that there is a easement that runs through the site, which is a 10-foot high by 20-foot wide culvert called Schroeder's Run that was buried back in the early 1800s and stuff. We didn't really find this out until about midstream, so you'll see when we talk about the plans, some of the development and things. There are some bike routes that do run into the project at Pratt Street up here at South Carrollton Avenue. And then we have some others that run east-west down here on James Street. And it'd be great to connect those things through. Presently, all the roads around it are public. South Arlington Avenue is not. So there are plans to maybe facilitate a change of ownership in that. So just to take a quick tour around the neighborhood, we're on Pratt Street looking at South Carey. Our site is to the left. You can see 3-story and 2-story buildings to your right. And as we kind of go eastward, this is the corner of the existing office uses that was built in the late 80s. It's primarily a 2-story office building. As we move down Pratt Street, where the building was set back a little bit with kind of a service loading area right off here. That doesn't front the street. And then if you look towards South Arlington Avenue, this is the main street that kind of runs south towards Pigtown. You'll see that there's a historic brick building here, 3-story, that's not part of our property. I believe it's owned by the Able Foundation. And then we're going to be going down here a little bit to look at the South Arlington Avenue. There's kind of a strange roundabout as soon as you come in here. It was almost like a turnaround. And then Arlington gets a little bit smaller as it runs south towards Pigtown. There's a beautiful park here, which we're kind of keeping in place with plans to renovate and rehabilitate it a little bit. But it's a nice green space and a connector to Pratt Street. If we turn around and look north off South Arlington, we're in the middle of that roundabout looking back towards Pratt Street, 2 nice buildings that flank either side off our property. And then as you come back down Arlington, headed south, looking north, the B&O currently has a large parking lot to the right. This really is kind of an employee area. It's not the public domain, so it's fenced off. And over the left, you'll see a lot of service yards and screening walls that are used to load the grocery store. So this really doesn't put its best face forward for the rest of the community. And as we move south, we're getting to the edge of the property where the B&O railroad tracks over here on the left-hand side. There's kind of a back entrance, which is surrounded by these service yards. This is the B&O connector back to Montgomery Park and Carroll Park as we move forward. And if you went a little bit off-site to the south, and if you're coming from Pigtown, this is the view you would see. Our project's on the left, B&O is over here on the right. And right in this area is when they start to kind of engage the public as their entrance to their museum and stuff. So coming along the southern edge of the property, looking back towards the B&O, you can see the railroad tracks, which are run occasionally, and then kind of the rear of the existing single-story retail building. And as we keep kind of marching down and looking back, you'll see more and more of that. The railroad tracks, there's a large vacant parking lot, which is kind of immediately to our south. Now I'm back on Carey Street. The bridge is immediately behind me. This is the lowest point of the site. So this is the rampart wall of the railroad structure. So the bridge, the railroad is kind of up here, about 20 feet high. And then this is where you get these garage frontages that are very kind of industrial. And then this is our site here on the right. As you march up Carey Street, headed towards the north, there is an existing street that enters the existing project right now. This is the existing bank pad where it doesn't hold the edge very well. Kind of some challenging garage frontages that need a little bit of help. And then coming from the west, looking towards the east, this is McHenry Street. As it comes into the site, this is the site here. There's currently a pedestrian accessible area, but there's no vehicular access. Grocers in the background, the Jumbo Fresh. And then as we head north, looking at Pratt Street, we get back to this two-story building, single two-story row homes on the left here as well. So a couple of project goals. We really looked at this site and we said, what would we want to do here to kind of make it part of the community and make it a viable contributor to it? So really trying to build community through mixed use, primarily residential or retail. One of the goals is to really open up this project to Pratt Street. It currently is walled off from Pratt Street with no physical access to it. We're really going to try to put the cars last and prioritize the pedestrians and the bike experience over these big parking fields. We also want to increase residential opportunities in the neighborhood by bringing a variety of different types of residential product that can promote anything from market rate apartments, attainable housing, workforce housing, active senior living, student housing. We want to retain the existing grocer and activate the street level retail. The grocer is really one of the largest assets that the owner has really worked very hard to kind of to stabilize and enhance, and really kind of building this whole thing around it and stuff. So we don't see the grocer going away anytime soon. And then one of the most important things is really extending the street grid and connectivity into the surrounding neighborhoods by looking at opportunities where we can kind of engage the local neighborhoods, promote this diverse mix of housing, have something that's feasible. We've identified maybe the first phase, not quite sure what the additional phases are, but we can show you what the build out will look like. And then really one of the other things the client has made a point to is having visual connectivity to the retail offerings by maybe having a little bit of a space in the middle of the project that can kind of relate and connect all the retail together. So the rough program that we were given was about plus or minus 800 multifamily residential units, and that could be a blend of the types I mentioned. We're looking to kind of replace the amount of retail and commercial, which was previously about 145,000. That's what this plan shows. And then we were providing about 500 parking spaces between all the different residential units and the commercial uses, and as well as providing some place that can animate and activate the community with a green space or a central plaza and things. So the key is really activating the streets and placemaking and connecting to the neighborhoods. So just some examples of programming, great streetscaping, sidewalk dining, and just activities that foster community as a reason for people to want to live here, shop here, and recreate and things. As well as the residential offerings, we're primarily looking at 5- and 4-story buildings with retail or retail amenities or retail or residential touching the streets at the appropriate locations. So a lot of what I'm going to show you today is based on a 5-level scheme. But some of the things we're looking at is the idea of putting stoops where we can. So the residential fronts the streets, and there's a sense of street ownership, and by making the things safer and a little bit more walkable, having indoor recreation for courts, a combination of at grade and above grade recreational amenities for the residential units as well. So kind of dive into the past of where we were and where we want to go. This is the existing site outlined in red. This is the existing street network shown in yellow, where we've got this existing street kind of between McHenry and Ramsey. And then we were trying to kind of look about what are the priorities. And then the client has really kind of mandated that this existing office use here would be maintained, as well as the grocer and the adjacent retail for the first phase. And they'll really have to work around these things and build upon their success and things. So with that, we kind of said, can we extend every street into the site, and what would that look like? You know, we do have 3 signalized intersections around the property, one at this existing street off Cary, and then 2 on Pratt Street. So the big play is to take South Carrollton off across Pratt Street into the site, open up the site to Pratt Street and a lot of the traffic and its prominence and things. So then we said, look, if we brought McHenry in, this is how it would happen. If we kept our existing street, which has some utilities in it, and then if we extended Ramsey Street, what would that look like? So we're trying to look at the block size, This is this utility easement that we found out about when we brought our civil engineering on board earlier this year and kind of pinned that down. That affects things because it's below grade and it's really a challenge to build over top of it. It's almost impossible. So we've been asked not to build over top of that or relocate it just because it'd be prohibitive. We'd rather spend the money on more thoughtful things that you can see. And then looking at different types of street configurations. So building upon Main Street. So what would happen if McHenry stopped at Main Street? What would happen if we took the existing street all the way through the project? What do the block sizes look like? So some of these things, if we did all this, you get a little bit of irregular block size because these would be kind of irregular parcels that may be challenging to build on. We have some grade here and some berming, so that makes this kind of a little bit challenging. So what we'd like to propose moving forward is a combination of a couple of things. We're going to build upon the success of the existing street and extend it all the way over to have better connectivity at South Arlington Avenue so that we can have a lot of traffic from Pigtown, have a proper way to get into the project. We're going to make this kind of the Main Street portion of the project, and we're going to keep and enhance the pedestrian connectivity of the residents to the west, where they can kind of walk into the project and things. With that, we kind of have a couple of things result out of this. We kind of come up with these nodes. So we're left with a series of blocks. This block is roughly 250 feet by 300. This one's a little bit larger. So we get these series of developable blocks working around some of the existing hard fixes, such as the office building and the grocer. And then we want to celebrate these kinds of nodes that you get. We want to terminate maybe this access, have something there in the intermediate that would kind of be the glue for the community could gather and recreate in, and then kind of upgrade this plaza and enhance it, as well as have a gesture towards the south, as well as the new B&O facilities that happen over here. So just to kind of key you in, we started this process about 2 years ago. And this is the first master plan we had last year in May. And this was the result of talking with our client, him kind of coming up with a strategy about how to keep as many of the existing tenants in the project still in the neighborhood and not having to have them go away and then come back and things. So we came up with this plan. This plan was interesting. It had about 700 residential units. The buildings were a little larger, as you can see with this building down here to the south. And it still had this large amount of parking in the middle, which was challenging and we were working on. The massing of this depicted shows 5 stories, with the bottom floor being mostly retail and amenities, showing the existing smaller office building that we were going to keep initially, and then keeping the grocer and the related retail adjacent to it. So this is what we had initially. You can see this large parking lot. This is what we came up with next. Still had the remnants of this large parking field, which we kind of identified as needing some work. Then we really pinned down and nailed down the location of this easement, stormwater easement that went down underneath. It's a bit large culvert. And we kind of came up with a new plan that broke the project into more developable blocks. And some of the buildings ended up being a little bit larger and stuff. So some of these things about this was that this street was not terminated by a building. It was terminated by a park that may have accessibility to the railroad tracks. And then we also were looking at having McHenry Street extend into the project a little bit and connect through and stuff. Once we kind of looked at that, we looked at where we started with an overlay of the easement, how it affected the buildings. And this is currently the scheme that we're going to be presenting today, which is a smaller blocks, smaller buildings that we think responds to the scale of the neighborhood and some of the product we might be doing, as well as kind of coming up with an area that has a couple different essential things that we think help build community. So this is the current plan as we have before you today. It's really celebrating the extension of Carrollton Avenue into the main part of the project, where we'd have retail facing the prime frontages off Pratt Street, as well as the interior visual proximity of each other, of building upon the grocer, some of the existing uses next to it, and then showing how we would implement the residential component into this. Why would people want to live here? Because there's active storefronts, there's a residential green amenity, there's placemaking, there's connectivity and what have you and stuff. So a series of smaller blocks with residential above it. Also showing some extensions of bringing some things out to Arlington Avenue, which holds the edge of the building, just like we're doing at Pratt Street. And then recognizing that Pratt Street, once we get kind of passed over here, becomes more of a more intimate sized street, and you're not going to have what you would see Pratt Street downtown. The other key thing was to really see what kind of momentum we can build off the B&O tracks as a green connector on a greater scale. We'd have to work with certainly more people to see how we can connect into Pigtown and to Carroll Park down to the south and things. So to kind of peek upstairs, you'd be having a series of double-loaded residential buildings. We've talked to different stakeholders in the years since we had the original plan, and we're working with people that generally are looking for smaller building sizes that have a lot of surface parking and things. So what you're going to see today is a solution that primarily relies on surface parking that's distributed amongst the site. It's not to say that this can't work for structured parking, which may be a more viable product in the future. The current market that we see and the feedback we get from potential development partners is that this wants to be of a certain nature. So you're not going to see structured parking in this initial tranche, but it doesn't preclude that from happening and things. And here again, to remind everyone, the key things for this, in order for this development to move forward, the client really needs to keep the grocer where it is, some of the adjacent retail, which has kind of this is a very long-term play because of the investment in it and the necessity of it. And then this is a medium kind of term play of the retail adjacent to it, as well as this office building here and things. So we kind of see this really as the bones that we're going to work around, and then trying to kind of knit this in very closely with the rest of the schemes. So we looked at some different diagrams to kind of rationalize how people move to and from the site. This is the pedestrian access points that we have. So we're maintaining the access from the west through this pedestrian via here and the existing street here as well. We're introducing a very strong pedestrian connection with the South Carrollton extension into the project. It's now terminated by a building, which we think terminates much better. We also are trying to come up with complete streets that would make pedestrian accessibility and connectivity much more enhanced. We have about 130 car parking lot out here in front of the grocer, which is kind of a requirement to retain and attract great grocer operators. We would like to talk about taking some of this pedestrian connectivity across the railroad tracks. We'd have to work with the various stakeholders. There's a wonderful community garden across the way. There's kind of the remnants of a path that people cut through here. We'd like to make that a little bit nicer and formalize it, as well as bringing these fingers of retail and residential out to help hold Arlington Avenue. This still is screened. You get these WB64s coming in. We've worked with our civil engineering partners to make sure that we can get proper truck loading in and out, trying to minimize these gaps in the storefront and things. And also recognizing that a lot of traffic from downtown will come down Pratt Street, most likely will come from the plaza, and then engage the project here, or they'll come down through Pratt Street directly from the north down into the south. The other is kind of a parking strategy and circulation. You know, we love parallel parking. We think it adds a lot to the streetscape, promotes visibility of the storefronts, slows down traffic, provides a necessary thing. Majority of the parking on site on the streets is parallel. We do have a little bit of head-in traffic or head-in parking here as designated by this, and the clients requested that we add a little bit of head-in parking here as well. And then you get these points where you kind of come into these parking courts. Here, these are these transition points where you kind of pull off the main drag and get into these more intimate courts and what have you and stuff, but still maintaining good connectivity with a pedestrian. Service and loading, we're identifying potential loading points that, these are the main streets where trucks will come into, as well as from the south. This is probably the largest service yard servicing the grocer, but we identify different move-in, move-out points, places to service the retail, trash facilities, and we see those as a combination of outside and undercover, behind roll-up doors. And then we wanted to provide a variety of green spaces. So you'll see two types of green spaces here. This color here in the light green is really kind of a public place that we would rehabilitate this park and enhance it. We'd have this town center, which is about 100-foot from building to building crosswise, gives us about a 70-foot square green area in the middle that we can program and activate. And then we have this wonderful potential to do something with the B&O tracks, this green finger that might kind of come across the site and reach up and engage the public. And this is that pedestrian connectivity that would be great to have the community gardens. These darker green colors are more for the residents. The residents would have a combination of rooftop as well as at-grade green spaces that could be used, as well as sharing these other common areas and stuff. And then just some areas where we see pedestrian connectivity, really trying to kind of make this a viable, real entrance and attract more traffic up from Pigtown and kind of conceptualize it. We've done a bunch of sections. I won't get into too much detail here. We got some large overall site sections and some blow-ups. This is a section cutting east and west looking north. So this is Carey Street, the low point. This would be our new Main Street, which is the extension from the north. And this is South Arlington and B&O over here. Just a blow up showing some of these things. We have more of these detailed later in the presentation with the landscape architecture. But thinking about the distance between the buildings, what does it look like as far as where the courtyards are? This is through the amenity area. Having street distances that promote wide sidewalks, generous landscaping, good planting zones, but also allowing cross shopping, which is kind of a magic number to how wide should the sidewalks be that you're comfortable cross shopping to the other side of the street to commerce and things. This is the other sections looking north, a variety of different ones. We'll get into these more. And then just a quick aerial massing. We're not here for architecture, here for the kind of the bones of the planning of the whole thing, but we're showing the retail activated areas in the light red color, and then the buildings above. This does not preclude setting these corners back or taking and adding some small pocket parks at the beginning of the whole thing. But we think between the existing park that we're going to rehabilitate and then the new town green and some of these green belts over here, we have a variety of different spaces. This is the same view if you're kind of hovering over the tracks looking north. This is where the grocer is. We're currently looking for a long-term solution where the possibility of building retail adjacent to it, or maybe overextending over top of it and reaching out to Arlington Avenue at a later phase, but that'd be much more down the road. And really quickly, this is the existing view, Pratt Street, standing where we would take the street across into our site. So now you would see the building terminating the view. You would see kind of this main street with a very generous sidewalks and planting strips, retail on both sides of the streets. This is a little over 80 feet from storefront to storefront, which allows cross shopping, is intimate enough. Hopping over on the west side of the project on Carey Street. This is the existing entrance, which is reusing some relics from the original project, we believe. To a new building where we would keep the existing street, maybe retain this, and then add some more residential that would front on Carey Street. We have a lot of residential coming down and touching the ground at Carey Street because we think it's not a retail street, and there's some residential opportunities that would flank what's happening across the street. And then if I'm coming from Pigtown, this is currently the view I see. The railroad track is over to the left. The grocer's over here, and you see a lot of these service walls, and it's really turns its back on the railroad. So we're trying to dress that up by long-term adding buildings over here, maybe enhancing this as kind of a green trail. It's currently fenced to the south where there's a large surface parking lot owned by the B&O, but we would like to see this greened up and kind of creating a green infrastructure and then dressing up this entrance and eventually maybe building over top of the grocer, bringing retail out to meet Carey Street as well. And then the one interior view, if you stand in the very middle of the site looking towards the west, this is McHenry Street here. This is what you see right now. You see the bank and it's a large parking field and expanse. This is where you would see a collection of residential buildings with rooftop amenities. This is this green area. We're about 100 feet building to building and building to face of the street here. This park, I believe, is 65 by 65. This could be the glue. We see this as an active programming area, maybe with some raised tabled crosswalks to promote walkability through the whole thing. Phasing, just to remind everyone, these were the buildings that we're probably going to work around and keep. Then we see the rest of the project kind of coming in. In the interim, we might have a nice green space between these areas and between the buildings we see happening in later phases. These buildings range and from 35 units to 158 units. So there's a variety of different spaces. This shows the demolition of what's on the current property, which is pretty much all new. We call this the build out plan, but really this needs to stay for the indefinite future and things, showing some connectivity, just overlays of the build out plan, which might show what we did demo and what we didn't. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kirsten, who will talk more about the landscape architecture.
Thanks, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kirsten Eaton, landscape architect analyst with Kimley Horn. So I'll go ahead and walk through some of our landscape architecture elements for the project. So some of our landscape goals, the biggest one we have is improving the pedestrian experience through enhanced streetscape and planting. So that means wider sidewalks. You'll see in our sections coming up that we are giving ample space for pedestrians walking through the site, as well as planting buffers and lighting. We want to differentiate between the public and private green space. So making note of like what's more for the public and what's for the residents of the project. Developing a sense of place that could be through creating outdoor rooms and gathering areas or focal points. Providing amenity areas for the residents, so different areas for entertainment, recreation and play, and relaxation. Lighting to provide safety along those streets. Creating some focal points, whether that be in the form of art, structure, landscaping, like specimen trees and things like that. And then implementing a diverse by primarily native plant palette. So we'll choose mostly native species to the area. Go to the next slide. So hitting on that goal of developing a sense of place, we've pulled some precedent images of what we're envisioning for some of those amenity areas. As mentioned, we want to differentiate between that public and private green space. So the nodes that Bob mentioned earlier in the presentation, those will be more of your public green spaces. So like the town green, that plaza, that existing plaza that's there, and some of those pocket parks. And then some of those darker green areas will be areas for the residents specifically. For resident amenity areas, that can include areas like outdoor kitchens and dining areas like you see in the top left. Some smaller playground for, it's probably going to be some families living here too, so you need some play areas for children. Potentially a dog park. Those are much more common now, and much more of a bigger need with these larger residential communities. For common spaces, envisioning some like gathering areas of seating or like recreation for outdoor games and such. And then also looking to tie into like the vibrancy of Pigtown through some like artwork or murals throughout the project. Next slide, please. For our materials, we eventually want to try and complement the architecture once we have that information, but in general, looking to provide more of a modern approach to the materials palette. So we're thinking more of like wood benches, maybe potentially integrated into tree planters, benches throughout the site to provide seating, modern light fixtures, both posts for the streets and then bollards for some of those amenity areas. Decorative iron or aluminum fencing to potentially designate those more private spaces for the residents. For the roads and sidewalks, we think it would be nice to integrate some specialty paving bands, maybe like a brick border accent or some scored concrete patterns. And then looking at, like Bob mentioned, some tabletop crossings to kind of slow down traffic through those streets throughout the site. Maybe those have some specialty paving or accents to those as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned in our goals, we want to implement a primarily native planting palette. This board is just a small preview of some of the native plant species we would include, but some of these include American sycamores, black gums, dogwoods, etc. And we want to put a lot of emphasis on color and texture through our plant palette. Like as mentioned, Pigtown is very vibrant and colorful, so we kind of want to implement that with this project as well, and this will be more developed in the future. Next slide, please. So this is our section through the proposed South Carrollton Street extension. This will essentially be the main drive through the site. In this section, we have parallel parking on both sides of the street, which would be 8 feet in width. We will have a 2-foot clear strip off of that parking just to provide people with access outside of the vehicle to step onto. As mentioned, we kind of imagine this maybe having some sort of accent with specialty paving or pattern with scored concrete. Along South Carrollton, we'll have a proposed 4-foot planting buffer, probably in the form of street tree pits. Again, we want to give people access outside of their vehicle to step onto the sidewalk. In this section, we're proposing 14-foot wide sidewalks that gives pedestrians ample walking room. Also, the potential for some outdoor furniture for some of those retail spaces. And we are proposing a 22-foot drive aisle for 2-way traffic. We do have the opportunity to go up to 24 feet if needed, but again, we wanted to give more emphasis on the pedestrian experience as opposed to the vehicular experience. And then again, it's not shown in this section, but we imagine some tabletop crossings through this area to slow down traffic on that main drive. Our next section is through the existing street, which is looking west. This is located between Ramsey Street and McHenry Street. Similar to South Carolyn Street, we're proposing a 22-foot drive aisle here, again with the 8-foot wide parallel parking on both sides and that 2-foot clear strip for people to exit their cars. Again, we'll have that 4-foot planting buffer here and a little bit of a wider sidewalk along the building on the right. We'll have 14 feet there, again with potential for some like outdoor seating areas for the retail. Next section, please. This one is through South Carey Street looking north. So just north of McHenry Street, those adjacent row homes have stoops. So we're kind of looking to replicate that on our side of the South Carey Street for our multifamily building. This will give residents direct access to their units from the street and, like Bob mentioned, give ownership of the street there. A little bit, proposing to narrow the drive lane a little bit to provide some parallel parking, that 2-foot clear strip again, and 5 feet of planting buffer here. So that'll give us a little bit over 15 feet for sidewalk width, which gives us plenty of space for those proposed stoops and walking area in between the stoops and the planting buffer. And Bob mentioned this earlier, but it is important to note that south of McHenry Street, those adjacent homes do have the garages facing towards South Carey Street, facing towards our project. So we will be looking at that a little bit more in depth later. So this is our section through Pratt Street looking west. West Pratt Street is more of an intimate neighborhood street and currently a one-way street with 2 driving lanes. There is existing parallel parking on the right side of the street, and we are proposing a curb extension to enhance that pedestrian experience here. Same sort of layout as the other sections. We'll have that 2-foot clear strip, again with a 5-foot planting buffer here, ample walking space for the sidewalk along the retail. This is our section through South Arlington Street looking north. Along South Arlington, we are proposing a 24-foot wide 2-way drive aisle. There is no proposed parallel parking along this street, at least in this section. We will have some head-in parking closer to the north end of the site. We will have a 6-foot wide-ish sidewalk to connect to that greater pedestrian network from Pigtown, draw some pedestrians into the site. And since this will be mostly back of house for retail, we're proposing a wider landscape buffer to kind of buffer those buildings there between the sidewalk and the buildings. And then our final section is cut through the rail tracks, and this is looking west through the site. It's cutting between buildings E and building F. So we provided some nice wide planting medians for that larger parking area, the largest area that we have on the site for parking. So we want to make sure that is heavily planted. We will have head-end street parking in front of building F. And then we have a nice wide 16-foot wide sidewalk, which will give plenty of space for outdoor gathering along that retail there. Looking in front of the building, there will be head-end street parking for building E. We'll have landscape islands throughout there as well with lighting. And then looking to the left side of this section, this is the south end of the site. There's about a 20-foot grade change from the buildings down to the very bottom of the rail tracks, which is kind of extending into West Austin Street. There is an existing footpath that goes from our site down to that neighborhood. So as we mentioned, there is opportunity in the future to potentially create a better network pedestrian connection from those existing homes into our site. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. Thank you all for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both for your presentation. It did take a little longer, but there was a lot to get through and unpacked. And you did it as efficiently as you could. I'm appreciative of that. It was very clear. And anything that we need to touch base on now, we will as we go through our Q&A. If you can stop scrolling for a moment, one thing that happens when you flip through a lot of slides like that, it makes us all dizzy. So what I'm going to ask for, if you can exit the full screen and bring the thumbnails to the left, happens all the time. It's not you. I'm not being critical. If you bring up because we'll be going back and forth a lot, and it'll be easier to just jump between things that way. Thank you. I really appreciate it. All right. Let's see. Questions from the panel, clarifying things about any of your strategy and your design process so far. We'll start with Osborne this time. Osborne, what are your questions for the panel? I'm sorry, for the team, not the panel. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Nice presentation, large project, which is all good. A couple of questions. Generally, remind me again, just in number, how many acres roughly is the site?
15.7.
Okay, so it is big. And then the existing buildings, I thought you said you're trying to preserve some existing buildings because they're key to the anchorage of the site and, you know, the success of how it develops, such as the grocer. But the building at the corner, I think it's the office building. It seems as though in your later phasing, that's gone. Is that planned that way? Is it going to be kept a tenant in a new building, or how's that working out?
I think initially we are going to keep that building, but we also kind of wanted to show what could happen later on down the road if that building was to go away. So for the office building, that has a shorter horizon. The grocer and stuff is there indefinitely as far as we're concerned. This could be another 10 years before this goes away. So in different schemes we have and have not shown that. Correct.
Got it. A few other questions. Connection to BNO in terms of the greenway that's coming through. Seems as though you've given some thought to it, but I'm not sure that it's fully captured. In other words, is it that at some point that green belt will turn into your site, or you're just acknowledging what's there now and moving forward?
It's currently off our site right now, but we think that it has the potential to foster community linkage and things. So we would like to work with the community on doing things that can connect through back to the project. So we would like to see this greened up. It's not used that much. So we'd like to work with the BNO and work with the community garden people to foster connectivity. And we think the railroad track, you know, whether it's a rails to trails light version of it, would be something we could investigate.
Got it. And then just south of that is a very important community, Big Town. And,
Yes.
how much attention have you paid to really connecting Pigtown to your development? Or, I mean, in other words, I believe the railroad has a fence around it right now, along that edge.
Yes,
So
this lot's
is,
fenced in right now.
got it. So then the goal in terms of connectivity is what? You got to come out of your project, go back to Arlington, and take Arlington down into Pigtown. Is that the
Right.
intent?
So we're trying to dress up this entrance right here, over to the by extending out and making it a proper road and dressing up landscaping, pedestrian connectivity. But we also want to kind of foster a connection across where we think this fence ends, and then have people be able to cut through here. But it's not on our property, so this is something we have to work with the stakeholders, that you could walk up through Pigtown, kind of come up here, and then kind of come into the project and shop, recreate, and live.
So I guess Carrollton and that sort of beaten path to connect, they don't necessarily align at the moment.
No, we originally had Carrollton coming all the way through, but it didn't go anywhere. So we revised that and we put a building to terminate that. And then so we think it can still be facilitated by coming around and then shooting across. This is the community garden here. And then go into the neighborhood.
Again, just a few more quick questions. As you kind of look at the typology, the building typology that you're considering, are there any opportunities to modulate or change the massing a little? Well, not change the massing, but modulate the heights of the various blocks of buildings? Because it seems as though they're all the same height at the moment.
They are, and this just represents a yield kind of attitude about it. It's going to be a combination of 4 and 5. We are carving out balconies. We see some of these buildings having rooftop amenities where we actually carve out the roofs of them. So this shows them covered, but some of these key locations we would, and we would love to articulate the buildings more. We've just kind of done block white wedding cake massing for right now to demonstrate what's the potential, what would that enclosure, and what kind of edges of the site do we want to reinforce.
Got it. Okay. And then the types of retail, aside from the grocer, are you thinking about having various retail types and sizes in these buildings, or it's just at the moment you're just saying ground floor is all retail, we'll figure that out later?
Currently, there's about 145,000 square feet of occupied retail. It's anything from the grocer to mobile phone stores to banks and what have you. We see a lot of those same type of needs that are being supported by the neighborhood coming back in, as well as trying to capitalize on increased food and beverage, healthier options. But at this point, we don't have any lead tenants that the client has, or we don't have a merchandising plan of it.
So it's somewhat flexible.
Yes.
Got it.
We also are trying to encourage the client to offer community supported facilities such as daycare, medical uses, things that the people in the neighborhood need.
Understood. And final question, bike routes. I heard you mention it, but I don't think I fully saw them or how they're being integrated into this concept.
The bike routes, I'm trying to find my slide. This is the best one here. So there's a bike route that comes down Carrollton. It stops presently at Pratt. There's a bike route that comes down Ramsey and doesn't hit our site. We would like to work to promote a bike route that would connect these two potentially at Arlington Avenue. So when Arlington Avenue right now is currently a private road, the thoughts are to make this a public road. And part of those improvements may include, and we would suggest that this is the perfect opportunity to connect these two bike networks to make them more sustainable.
Okay. And I said that was the final question, but this is the final one, sorry. So, as you know, you got a really historic and a great storyteller site on property right next to you, B&O. Have you had any conversations with them and potentially how you can begin to have the two projects talk and support each other. And I'm not talking about technically, I'm talking about just a visitor to B&O potentially can take advantage of some of your retail. Is there a way you can connect them?
Yes, we're engaging them in that aspect and really talking to them about what next phases are, about how they can improve accessibility. Right now, it's mostly focused down here at the south because they're really using this as kind of the gateway to their new facilities and things. So that's why we're trying to enhance and promote this connection a little bit more to kind of gather some of that traffic. But it'd be wonderful to talk about how can we not have this giant parking lot on the other side of Arlington Avenue, or how can people thoughtfully move employees, visitors, patrons, move between the two projects and stuff to kind of create this synergy and this increased value. That's still kind of in the works, and we really want to work on this part of it because it's much more closer to us. We think we're trying to engage these people right now with upgrading and addressing this, and we think this green linkage would be another great idea that could help promote their greater connectivity in the community.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Osborne. Kevin, what are your questions for the team?
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
So I guess if you go back to that easement diagram of the easement, just to be, is your team dealing with 100% certainty in what the restrictions are in and around that element? Like, is it like a non-negotiable for any sort of structure or anything like that?
As with any utility easement in the city, you are allowed to build over top of it. There's additional requirements. We did the same thing on Yard 56 where we were going to build over the easement, and then we had to have a 20-foot offset from each side of it. I don't know what that requirement is for this one. Economically, it's very much of a hardship. And then if you build over top of it, you have to take ownership of it. So if anything happens to that utility while you're building over top of it, you assume full liability for it. So it's typically our developer clients shy away from because of the complexity and the cost and the liability. So in this case, we'd like to promote and investigate a use where we don't build over top of it. It certainly doesn't preclude that from happening at a later date.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so given that, and I understand that's a tremendous curveball to have thrown at you, like after you've already started thinking about this. Did you consider a scheme that maybe was a less conventional grid that just sort of embraced that alignment and tried to have just to do a road, for example, a roadway over that, and just sort of really rethink how you thought about the grid?
We looked at it a little bit, but it didn't make sense. And then I was worried about coming to UDAAP with an organic grid in an urban environment. And, it's the natural thing. It would seem to extend the street grid. So, but maybe we should investigate that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what your initial connect the grid and heal the grid, it makes the most sense. But just sometimes exceptions happen, and they can actually add an unexpected richness that you explore. Yeah. But again, it depends on the block sizes and how things fit and all of that. And I get that that's not an easy task either. But and then I guess my last question is if you go, I think it was a diagram, but it was called nodes of opportunity or something like that. Yeah, like that one right there. So this thing of extending the street grid, I'm just curious, why the east-west? Why wasn't it just shifted? Why didn't you just start with the assumption of it was shifting down, aligning with McHenry and Ramsey, and just sort of really making the connection through a little bit more seamless? What was driving the shift?
Well, one of the things was we have a signalized intersection here at Clare, and already have a street established there. So there's a connection point. There's various utilities and things. So we wanted to keep that. We felt that there was a lot of value in that connection. The other thing too is if we brought McHenry through, which is this one, we started to get some smaller blocks in here and things. And between this, it just didn't feel right. And so we decided to keep McHenry and maintain the pedestrian accessibility to it. And then it gives us a little bit more flexibility with our grids. Like I said, this is a 300 by 300 grid with an easement running through it. This is about 250 by 300, and you get down to some smaller ones. These could all work. Yeah. With structures and parking decks. And we would love to have that happen in the future, and we promote it and things. But we felt this gave a variety of block sizes they seem to kind of be a good start.
And then, so my last question is, your parking counts, like what is generating your parking requirements? Like, are you working with like a market expectation or a minimum code, or like what allowed you to reduce the grocery parking, and could it be reduced further? Or are these placeholders, or what's your thinking behind that?
Well, it's probably more market driven. We see a lot of this as attainable housing and a mix of other types, which historically don't have really high parking counts, but the residential units. So it basically works out that the commercial spaces are parked at about 2 per 1,000, which for an urban location seems like it's more than adequate. And then the residential parks a little over about 0.4 spaces per unit. And then when you have a share between the two, you might get a little bit better efficiencies. So we think it's a good starting point for where we are. The other things that we can do is we can look at different types of parking, whether it's tuck under parking, whether it's structured parking. As the blocks develop, we can respond to the parking needs by increasing or decreasing through these various vehicles.
Okay, thanks. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Sharon, what are your questions for the team?
Just a few. Did you all study paradigm projects for this type of work, where there's challenging pressures to meet parking standards and retail, residential, so forth?
Well, it's interesting because there are no parking requirements anymore in the city, and so I think we're finding our way. We have been working on a project up in Remington under some previous scenarios. It's Sisson East, which came before you guys probably a year and a half ago. And we learned a lot about that. We actually got to a little bit more advanced leasing standpoints, and people are starting to get comfortable with some of these reduced parking rates, especially the retail tenants. Also, it really depends on what type of housing goes here. So there's still a lot of things that are up in the air. Even the unit counts, we're using a plug number, which is kind of like a standard market rate apartment. Which is 1,150 gross square feet per unit. If this went to student housing, you could have more units. If one block went to student housing, you'd have more units, maybe less parkings. If you went to senior living here, you would basically, depending on what kind of facility, you would almost eliminate all the parking except for the visitors and staff. So there's a ton of variables, which I think will kind of be massaged as we fill in the blocks. As I mentioned, our developer client is talking to different stakeholders to partner with and trying to get a good mix and variety. And each one of those things ideally would self-park on each block, but there's also streets and there's also sharing of parking. So that I think will develop as we move forward.
Yeah, and sorry, just to clarify, I was talking about parking as one of the pressures on desirability and marketing the thing, but mostly I was talking about the character of shopping districts that have and mixed use districts. Have you looked at precedents where they've been able to accommodate all of these things in one place really successfully? That was really more the question.
Yeah, we do a lot of mixed use in the firm, both here in the city and other places and stuff, and we feel very comfortable with it. I don't have precedents that I can share with you right now, but that's something I can bring back when we meet again to kind of validate what we think are viable approaches. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, and what is the access to public transportation here?
So that is off Pratt Street. There's a circulator. And there's 2 bus stops off Pratt Street. So there's a bus stop on the north side of Pratt Street here, another one on the south side. There's the Baltimore Circulator, which is right here as well. And then the bike trail that terminates here, another bike trail just south to us.
Okay. And are there bike share facilities in the neighborhood? Are there things like that around?
They're more limited, and that's something that I should include in this diagram. So good point.
Okay. And when you were investigating the options for circulation, vehicular circulation, did you examine, in particular, the connection to South Arlington and potentially creating a mutually beneficial node for both the new B&O museum and your property. So you have this meaningful link to both.
I think that could be something interesting to look at. One of the interesting things is that the alignments of these roads right now, West Cross Street, you come up West Cross Street and you have this kink in the road and things. So there's some strange geometries, and I think something like that would certainly help do that. We haven't gone off our property to that extent, and right now, and we're really trying to work out an agreement between the two facilities about this private road. But that could be part of that future discussion, and really trying to clean this all up and make a more meaningful connection.
Okay. And then, funny, is there even farther afield, is there a rails to trail system at all that could be brought into closer proximity to this site?
I think the closest one would probably be the Gwynn Falls Trail, which is down near the Casino Entertainment District, which is down here. I don't know offhand if there's one that runs. I know it runs over here to the west somewhere, but I don't know where it is right now. So another thing to add to our analysis.
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. I only have a couple of questions before we head into comments. The first one is a very practical one. If you can zoom into your site plan on the south portion of it, I have a question about the portion that connects to Austin Street. You mentioned there's a conversation there with the stakeholders for facilitating at least pedestrian connection. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the condition of, I see that Austin dead ends there. Is that the extent of the public right of way? Does the actual remaining tiny bit of green space in the railroad, is that private property? What are the possibilities of connecting vehicular even access through there?
There is vehicular access currently as an easement, a private easement, between this large parking lot and our property. There are no other easements across the track that I know of. This does seem to dead end, and these are these community gardens, and there's kind of a gravel path where the community has voted with their feet how do they choose to circulate between the sites. And our idea would be to kind of embrace that and formalize it a little bit more and make it easier, but we don't have any legal agreements to do that. But I think that would be a common goal that could benefit our project and the residents we would serve.
Is that a private property between the end of Austin and your property?
Yes, this is owned by B&O, I believe.
That segment is B&O. So it is possible by talking to the B&O to gain access through there and even start to connect vehicular traffic through there as well?
You could do
Hypothetically
that.
speaking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be something interesting. We do have some grade there, and then one of the sections, because you start to get a bit of grade, the railroad track is elevated, it's almost a grade here, and then it gets to be about 20 feet above. So there might be a little bit that you would have to traverse and navigate, but I think that could be an option.
Yeah, I have more on this a little bit later. I just wanted to understand kind of the actual condition there. Appreciate it. I see that there's a connection to that parking lot, but not to the street. We can unpack this here in a minute. A lot of the rest of the stuff are comments from me. The only other question will be, have you shared any of this design you mentioned the developers speaking with potential stakeholders and trying to align partnerships. Have you shared this work so far with anybody else? Is this kind of the first time folks are seeing it? Have you shared it with B&O? Like what level of engagement are you in at this stage?
Well, from B&O, our client has had many iterations with them and stuff. We haven't been part of those because I think they're still evolving. back in April of 2025, we presented to the Neighborhood Association of Holland's Market by Zoom and talked to a majority of the neighborhoods on Zoom. And then we've been in front of citizens of Pigtown, which is kind of what we've spearheaded as our main community group that we want to kind of collaborate with. We've had different iterations, and we have another presentation, I think, on June 30th with them. And we've agreed to do more of those as well with our land use attorney.
Okay, got it. No, I'm just trying to see how much input you've been able to gather on this. And it sounds like it's forthcoming. And to that end, when you mentioned you presented in 25, that would have been the plan without the easement, right?
Correct.
Right. So there's quite a bit of update and new thinking in there. So that would be great.
Yes.
It would be awesome. You know, well, here, that was my question. So thank you for answering it. And we can pop into comments because the reason why I was asking that is because it seems like there's a significant amount of work that's been done, both in transitioning from the previous scheme, introducing the easement, and really working through some of these new geometries and new thinking about the project, that it is at a good stopping point to gather feedback. I mean, both from this panel, but also from various kind of constituency groups. And I think it's an important stage of the project. And I don't know, you know, some development teams show this level of development, right? The layer cake thing, but in the back pocket, there's already renderings and all of that figured out, facade articulation of all of it. I don't know if that's the reality here, but I actually would I like the fact that the starting point is a simple mass and a little bit more of a diagrammatic thinking and a little bit more of a general thinking, because it suggests at minimum that there's still an open mind about exactly how this is done, which I think is a great place to be. And it's probably the best place to start talking to folks, including us and any of the other stakeholders that you have. It would ultimately be, I want to make no mistake that it will be ultimately up to the design team and the development team to decide how this exactly is going to be designed and worked. But I think this is the place where you, in time, to get a lot of feedback and really evaluate different options. And some are going to probably make it into your final solution and some will probably not. And that's okay. But I do appreciate you bringing this kind of in this early stage. I think simple massing is great because it allows us to really test certain ideas at their most fundamental. Sometimes by the time the textures and the windows and the dogs and the trees come in, a lot of it gets hidden. So I actually appreciate that there's no full-on renderings yet, and we can really just talk about, you know, kind of how this is planned and envisioned on its very fundamental basis, knowing that it will continue to evolve, knowing that even as you presented it, this is going to be phased. So the way it goes with phasing, more likely, I don't know if for sure it's going to be phased, but there's, you know, a chance that it is. The way it goes with phasing or anything that takes more than 2-3 years, things change along the way. So it is important to understand that this is kind of an evolving model. That's how I look at it, and that's how the panel is probably going to look at it. But the way we're going to approach it for today's review is to really test it against some just fundamental urban design principles, which I know is what you're designing with as well, except that there's so many constraints and considerations on this site that things are not always perfect. And, you know, there's some compromises that need to happen here and there. So I just want to encourage you, you're at a good stopping point or pausing point to talk to folks and get input and make the design better. I think ultimately the pieces you're going to choose to bring into your design process are going to make it better. The ones that don't work are not. So that's important, and I look forward to seeing how that evolves. The reason why I bring that up is, like, as you mentioned, you know, Pigtown is one of the communities that you're engaging with. That's a little peculiar because that's across the tracks and somewhat disconnected still, kind of just by virtue of your geography and kind of the railroad track that's in between it. I'm sure you're going to interact with some of the other neighbors, the edges around, as they interface with that. The reason why I bring it up is because you mentioned it from the beginning of your presentation. It's a very vibrant community. Pigtown, Holland's Market. There's been work done and developed in, you know, the last 20 years, maybe not on this scale, which is what makes this project so significant, but on a few smaller scales and throughout the neighborhoods. And they've all added to this character and what folks that live there recognize as their communities. I realized that both, BCT is the planning and architecture designer, and then Kimley Horn is landscape architect. They're all based in Baltimore, but there's something about Baltimore that is even more granular than that. Regardless of which neighborhood, you don't know Pigtown the way folks in Pigtown know Pigtown or Holland's Market. So some of these conversations I think are important also because it's going to help you, even though you think you know what these neighborhoods are about, to really get down to like what would make this development feel like it's part or connected to Pigtown or Holland's Market or all of these surrounded communities and be representative of that vibe, although it's still looking to bring something new and bring things forward and bring to the community something they don't have. So I realize there's a little bit of that, but I think it's important in those conversations to try to really get down to what makes these neighborhoods so special and how can that really be brought in here. So far what I'm hearing from the team are things that are kind of low-hanging fruit, like the stoops along Cary. I agree. I mean, that opportunity wherever you don't have retail to bring some ground level entries, absolutely all day long. But, some of the other things start to get a little bit too generic. I heard from the landscape architect speaking about murals, to make it vibrant, like it gotta be a little more than the mural. So I really want to invite you all to dip your toes a little bit deeper into the neighborhood. Some of it will be through conversations, other things will be through a little bit kind of deeper analysis of what's there and what you can leverage and really bring to this development that would make it look very special. It's very easy in a drawing like this that is all simple white blocks to say, oh, this is just a shopping center, right? But that's not what you want to do. That's not what was in your goals. Your goals was a vibrant mixed-use community, right? So this is a good point where you've kind of mostly figured out some of the pragmatics and the square footages are working and the parking is reaching its count to kind of take a pause on that portion of the work and really put some, high quality effort into understanding now what does this urban environment want to feel like and how does it truly really start to connect with its surrounding neighborhoods. So enough on that. I know you're thinking about it. I just wanted to make sure that we talk about it and mention it so that it's clear to everybody that before this gets to the next level, and when I say next level, we're going to see windows and doors and materials in the buildings and, articulation and the landscape. It's important that there's a specific agenda as to how that's done in a way that really connects and complements the surrounding context. To that end, we would like to see some column precedents. I think Sharon called it what was it, Sharon? Used a different word lately, but
paradigm projects.
Paradigm projects, or you're right. You've done a lot of these mixed use projects, even in Baltimore. So whether it's from your own work or from the work of others, I think it's really important to position this project. I think that's what Sharon was looking for. That's what I'm looking for as well. Is this like Canton Crossing or is it more like something else? Do you know what I mean? It's important that even within your portfolio, you can give folks an idea of like, this is sort of what we're thinking, but this is how it will be different. It's important because I have lived around Canton Crossing for a while, and I think it was the same team. I remember Kimley Horn was part of it, right? Yeah. And I happened to review the phase 2. And it was interesting. There was a learning kind of moment between phase 1, as you did your phase 1. And when we were reviewing phase 2, we were talking about all the things that can be improved. And sure enough, when it was built, they were there and everything was better. Like all of those things really, truly improved it. So from a lot of the edge planning and like all of that, you can see kind of that continuation. So it's important when you bring examples that you are critical in an honest sort of way. What are the things that really worked in this project we did? Therefore, we want to bring them here. And what are the kind of things that were improved later on? And we can, double up and improve even here a little bit more. Those are extremely fruitful conversations because they anchor your work in some really solid kind of design decisions and proof of concept, which I think is pretty great. So it would really help both the next review we have together, but I would even recommend any of your future outreach things to start to introduce some of those ideas because they're very helpful in folks understanding kind of what the vision behind this is. To that note, I do want to mention to the landscape architect, Kirsten, I think that some of the slides you showed read a little bit too much like checking boxes and kind of really generic. And of course, the explanation is you guys haven't figured it out yet. It hasn't been designed yet and whatnot. But I think some of the examples of kind of the playground equipment and the dog park sign start to read a little too out of like, oh, and there's going to be this and there's going to be that and all that sort of stuff. I really wonder if at this stage, as diagrammatic as it is, if we can benefit from you looking at the site plan as it is and starting to maybe more diagram and conceptualize these things rather than saying, oh, and there's this, and there's, it seems a little bit too drop in, like every green rectangle on the plan that's going to get this thing or that thing. I would really like kind of in the next presentation to see more design thinking and design work rather than kind of these individual elements. I realize that it's very early in the process, but we're curious in your thinking as a designer and as a landscape architect here. You have the advantage of being on this project from this very beginning, and we want to see you like really start to impact it with some of that thinking. I say it because we looked at other projects earlier that didn't have a landscape architect that they sorely needed. And you are here, and I hope that between, you know, BCG, who's done this all the time, and you guys together as a team, that we can start to see some of that conceptualization happening on the landscape level. For example, I appreciate the typology you started to layer with the streetscape. I want to see a similar diagram that starts to interpret the green spaces and the outdoor spaces in terms of a typology. I think it's really important to communicate that in a way that's kind of non-generic and non-generalized. This is sort of like checking boxes, even with the next page, you know, some random applications of things. And this is a very specific place for a very specific community. And it's really important that we see design ideas that are meant for this project. So just that was a quick thought that I wanted to share. I wish there was something we can discuss on these slides, but there isn't, you know, because it's non-specific and it's not. Even the goals before kind of a little bit very general. So I want to see some goals that relate specifically to this project beyond kind of the general, what we would expect, you know, best practices and design approach for a project like that. All right, I'm going to pause here. I have a list of more specific things, but I have a feeling that some of them will be covered by the other panelists. If there's anything left from my list, I will chime in at the end. But those were the two big things that I wanted to touch on before we dive into the specifics. With that said, I think we started with Osborne for this project. So Osborne, what are your comments for the design team?
Sure. If we can go back to maybe a site plan slide that shows the development laid out, that would be helpful. I'll probably just kind of pick up from some of your thoughts there, Pavlina, related to the community and how do you connect back to the community. I think if there were a graphic, and maybe you did have it, and you don't need to shift, you can stay here, that kind of showed and captured beyond this sort of a trapezoidal area that defines your site, you will notice the street grid, it kind of comes together at this point, right? And in an odd way, it's not necessarily a clashing of grids. I think it's an easing of grids. And what I mean by that is, it just seems to me the B&O right-of-way and the railroad alignment offers you some opportunities to kind of transition and arguably bring those communities kind of into your site. And it may seem as though initially that the railroad is like a hard edge, but I think it can be of convenience to you and how you organize your elements. Granted, there are a number of kind of big infrastructural elements around here that inform in how you organize the site, particularly the easement or the underground easement. That's one, but I think that's actually even a lesser concern of mine. The other is you're trying to build on the existing street that's there that comes in off of Cary and kind of connects back to Arlington. But I'm not sure you're kind of really taking advantage of that. I understand there's utilities and stuff that's probably in that street today. And to be able to have a viable project, you can't ignore that. You have to consider it. So all that's reasonable. It's rational, and it's great. My concern, though, is Carrollton. A lot is being hinged from your perspective on extending that street through. But is it really as important as, let's say, Arlington or even Cary Street, right? I understand the benefits and the convenience and how it affords your project a certain amount of flexibility by bringing it through, and you can. But how you terminate that street or how you transition that street into the project, I think it's still a little bit questionable to me. And I think the reason it's happening is because of some of the other constraints or requirements of your project, such as you got to maintain the grocer. And I do understand that. I appreciate that. Good. The office building to the corner of Pratt and Cary, maybe to a lesser extent. And that's probably the reason in part why you're thinking that at some later date, that might be able to be phased differently and handled in a different manner. But you don't want it to be as a constraint, or you don't want it to be such a hard criteria similar to what the grocer is. All right. So then the question becomes, it seems to me that your project is kind of being divvied up into two parts. There's kind of the commercial, long-lasting anchor tenant type piece, which is to the east side of the site. And then there's the great opportunities to the west. Oh, but by the way, you still need to respect and transition back to the communities to the west. So, but when I look at the layout, I can come to the conclusion to some extent that in a way, you're almost like turning your backs on the communities, right? Particularly to the south. And whether that's by design, it's intentional, or it's kind of like an unintended consequence, and we're kind of rationalizing that because we do have the B&O crossing through, I don't know, right? But I do believe we should take a little bit more effort, expend a bit more effort to try to bring that community into your site. But then there's also the flip side argument that, this is Baltimore, and it's a town of communities, and each community is unique. We may not always want to stitch into the next community, so you have to consider that. But in a way, I think your site can mediate some of that, right? But you have to make that concerted effort to bring them in. And I don't know, and actually you did say it, Arlington, the way the alignment of Arlington goes back to, I can't recall the street as it continues southwest something. It's a little bit awkward there. So if you're trying to connect to Pigtown that way, maybe that's where the cars connect. But I still believe there's got to be some kind of pedestrian connection across that B&O right of way. So I would really strongly urge the team or the owners to kind of begin to explore that. It will only help. And the fact that you're planning for so much retail, you're going to need communities to support that retail. And the easier and more convenient you can make it for them to get to your site, you will always succeed. So take that under consideration. So how do you do that? Well, you did have studies initially that kind of brought South Carrollton down, to B&O, and somehow those were kind of abandoned, and, you elected to move forward with terminating everything into this retail building. But the connection is lost, you see? And, I would actually urge you to rethink that maybe as you got to the location where South Carrollton kind of connects to or intervenes on that existing street that runs east-west. Maybe that's where the grid kind of pivots slightly to get you closer back to Austin. And I think it does two things. It does not preclude a connection, whether it happens with your project or it happens at a future date. It gives you an opportunity to connect. Pedestrian-wise, maybe vehicular at some point in the future. I don't know. But I think what it also does is it begins to give you and your site a chance to connect to that green belt that extends to the park to the southwest. I think that's very important from my perspective. That brings me now to the town green, right? So is the town green appropriately or correctly located? When you think of a town green or town center, it wants to be somewhat central to a site, but your site is unique. Your site isn't kind of concentric. It isn't always inward looking. Your site, I see it more as a transition from one community to another. So maybe is there an opportunity to kind of take that town green area and maybe move it down to where the retail space is? And that begins to create a reason, right, to kind of connect things through. Maybe you'll still need some kind of a small pocket park up there. I don't know. Maybe the retail extends out so it kind of really strengthens South Carrollton, as a counterpoint to the grocer across the way. So I think these are things you need to kind of consider moving forward. Just a few more points. I still think this kind of railroad path or piece of infrastructure that crosses through at the edge of your site, this is a very important edge of your site, this kind of south area here. And somehow the greening of that area, I think you should really think about how pedestrians can navigate that area all the way from South Arlington down to South Cary, right? It's almost as it's almost as if it has the opportunity to be a linear park of sorts. Yet, and off of that linear park, there's so much that can occur in terms of how you develop and organize your buildings. You can have buildings now that are facing two sides. One building faces the park, one building faces the inner workings of your project. And there's a grade change there, which I think will work to your advantage. So it does provide you with some sense of security because you'd be slightly elevated. It provides view. But at the same time, it provides for different types of plant material that potentially can work along that edge to really enhance and reinforce your project. Along Arlington, unfortunately, fortunately, you're across from the museum, but unfortunately, it's the backside of all of the commercial, the grocer. We've not necessarily seen anything just yet in terms of how you intend to handle and mitigate all of that loading area and the parking lots, etc. But I'm sure you'll kind of consider that. The one piece of the project that I'm still grappling with is that entry at Arlington and Pratt. Because you've got that existing structure right there at the corner, you have to kind of come down Arlington a little bit and then turn in. You're potentially mediating or mitigating that by adding a plaza, but then the plaza opens up into a parking lot, right? Which relates to the retail. I think how you organize the retail is fine, but I think what needs some more study is where you place or selectively locate parking associated with the retail versus the grocer. And that bit of retail that kind of located at the end of that little access plaza, it just seems a little bit awkward to me. I'm sure there's a way to manage and deal with that or configure it slightly differently to help you. So the connection back to B&O, again, right now, the way I'm reading it is you've mentioned that that existing street is important. You want to make the connection there. But yet, as you enter your site off of, the access point across the street from B&O, to come further into your site, you kind of have to walk through parking. And even if you place a sidewalk there, it doesn't feel as though it's a pedestrian-friendly area, particularly because the parking is head-in parking. So I'm wondering if the reason you do have the head-in parking is mainly to support the grocer and the needs of the grocer, because it's more dense, it's more parking, and I get that. But I don't know that that's actually the way to resolve that there, particularly if you're kind of making the assumption that that's your key connection point back to Arlington, back to Pigtown, and back to the B&O Museum. So I think that really needs quite a bit of work in terms of working through that area. I think one of the advantages or one of the real steps you can take is place some more emphasis on that edge to B&O. Maybe reorganize all South Carrollton a little bit so it can pivot and provide a connection, maybe initially a pedestrian connection back to Pigtown, and maybe in the future some kind of a vehicular connection as well, and just reshape those buildings so that they kind of reinforce the edge along B&O a little bit. More. The parking lot that's associated with the grocer, I get that. It's a key tenant. You got to provide that. But I still believe as well there's a way to deal with the other side of South Carrollton that would really reinforce that area. Just two more comments. The retail, I think, is good. It's a great opportunity. A lot of projects of this size, they come in, and it's probably 90% residential and 10% retail. It seems as though you've struck a better balance, certainly at the street level. But I think you should give it some thought in terms of modulating how that retail works. Retail is tricky, I get it, because you got to find a tenant, you got to find the appropriate tenant. You already have a large anchor tenant here in the grocer, so you're looking for more intimate community type retail elements here, and I do understand that, but I still think not everything just needs to be a box, right? There are ways to work through who goes where. And then finally, on the building typologies, in my question, and I did ask, it sounds as though you do have some flexibility in terms of modulating heights. And I think what cued me into that was the comment related to adding stoops along South Carey. That's great, and that's wonderful, but it has to be tied to a building typology that supports that and one that really works. And then my final comment here is McHenry Street. I do understand why you're not bringing it through, but that pedestrian crossing between the block to the north and the central L there, where that little bump of retail across from the town center, I don't know if it's an issue just yet, and maybe when you develop the layouts a little bit further, we will better understand this. But that kind of connection, it could set up a situation where you have a bunch of mid-block crossings. And because you're so close to that signalized intersection, I don't know if that's truly safe. The reason I'm saying that too is if someone comes down McHenry and they want to get into your development to go to the retail, how do they get across the street? Right? It's not a natural crossing point. So you need to really think about that. Right? But altogether, it's a big project, 15 acres. It does seem to support the 800 plus units. But I think if I were to leave you with one thought here, it's all about connectivity. There's so many things you're trying to connect to. You have to really step back, rationalize it, and find a way to do this in an eased fashion. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osborne. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Thanks. Wow, what a fascinating project. I'm just really intrigued by this, and really appreciate you coming in at this early stage. And I know that probably some of my comments, like, they're maybe not going to be totally fair, because like I've been looking at this for one day, and you guys have been working on it for months or years, however long. But I guess like in many ways, like I completely understand like the logic behind almost all of your moves and the way you walked us through it, and I and then when you kind of look at the aerial views, you sort of see there's a certain sense of order, and it kind of makes sense in a way with the grid in many ways. But then somehow, like underneath all of that, there was something very, very deeply like unsatisfying to me about sort of the outcome. And I think it's when I try to just like land myself like at eye level in any location, like in the plan, and like I just imagine what that view is. And I think once you begin to generate those views, it'll probably bear this out. But like no matter where you are, you're always like adjacent to some like sea of some like bay of parking or sea of parking. Like no matter where you are, there's very few locations where you're sort of in a real space or like a two-sided road that doesn't sort of right around the like the next 10 feet open up the kind of parking. So I think that my feeling is that that's going to amount to what feels like a series of fairly rationalized buildings, but like placed in in seas of parking, right? And you even have like South Carrollton is like a road that's wants to be a main street, but then on one a huge chunk of it is like half of the street is just a parking lot. I mean, sorry, on the other side of it is a parking lot. At that point, the whole thing might as well just be a parking lot. So I'm sort of given that kind of, and I completely understand like why this is where it is, and especially with having to have spaces between buildings to accommodate that easeway, it just adds another layer of complexity to how you work out this grid. That's like it's fighting each other. So to me, like when it's like these are kind of like unsatisfying results, like they kind of keep this is the kind of project I'm sure that kind of keeps you up at night, right? Like how can you kind of break free of something? What can you kind of I don't know, what kind of provocation or what kind of element can you just like shift to kind of unlock some other approach? And I guess when I was just looking at this, I kind of thought, again, these might be things you've already thought about, or might be completely, premature or maybe like not appropriate to suggest. But when I was looking at it on the plan where the parking is for the B&O, like that large sort of parking lot along Arlington, that to me seems like the perfect location. It's actually perfectly sized for like a 2 or 3 or 4 story deck that could serve both the museum and the grocer, right? And then sort of like just embrace like that sort of interior moment to be the place where service and sort of like where non-pedestrian oriented things are happening, and just sort of completely free up that parking lot in front of your in front of the grocer and turn that back over into develop like something that could contribute to sort of apartment buildings or the mixed use environment that you're trying to create. And again, like I know that's completely contingent on if that works for the Railroad Museum, or if they would be open to that, or if that would even serve their needs. But one could imagine if it did actually provide an advantage to them for whatever reason, it could be like they could unlock enough land value for you on your site that it's actually worth contributing to something like that, even though it's off-site, because it sort of completely frees up this sort of the sea of parking in the center where you really want some sort of like a central meeting space or something more park-like or plaza-like to happen, long term. So that was sort of like one sort of initial thought, like what if you tested that, and does that unlock something? I think the other thing I already mentioned was what if you tested a more organic grid that embraced that easement and then was really a little bit more reminiscent of the patterns and the sort of the palimpsest of how the tracks used to how the site used to look in that historic photo that you showed earlier on. Like what if there was something more organic? And I can't believe I'm saying it, because I would usually never suggest that, because it's efficient and clear, like it's easy to think about streets and alleys, and like that's how the way you want urban Baltimore to be, but given like the constraints that it's putting on you, sometimes testing a bad idea can you might lead to some intermediate or sort of some other kind of idea that just adds riches to what you're doing, and maybe you revert back, but you have like a different kind of perspective on it. So anyways, those are kind of like I just think that would be a big way to sort of. I think those, would be interesting approaches to kind of just like shake things up a little bit and see where it goes. I love the idea of thinking about the railroad track as like a kind of a linear park that Osborne just mentioned, and I think looking at how one could cross it is a really great idea. I think just slightly loosening the grid, like if Carrollton came down and then bent in the same way that Arlington bends and kind of connects with the street on the other side, and even if it's just a pedestrian connection, again, it just sort of ties it into the community. This is such a transformative and big project that I really don't think that holding on to that signalized light at the existing street should be driving big framework decisions. I think if it makes more sense to bring McHenry and Ramsey across, like I don't see why those blocks wouldn't work. You'd still end up with blocks in with the right dimensions for development parcels. To me, that's just a very obvious way to kind of better link to everything west of South Cary. I would look at that as well and just rethink that. And then I'm trying to think what else I have. Yeah, I guess leveraging also that corner, that existing office building, which is seemed to be kind of quite nice with a nice plaza behind it. Again, like I think like leveraging that a little bit more is important right now. As Oscar mentioned, you kind of, if you happen to make your way into the site from that northeast side, you kind of are through this nice plaza and then you're into a parking lot, and like you're looking at a building that you don't really know if it's the front or the back. And I think that's another problem with like the hierarchy right now of the grid. There's not a clear kind of internal external block where like the public realm is primary in one and more backup house in the other. Like that little parking lot there by the plaza is an example of not, like, are you looking at the back of retail that's actually fronting on Carrollton? Is it two-sided retail? Is it like, how does it service? Like there's just it just seems like there's some like questions around sort of like street hierarchy and public realm and what's front and what's back. You have like, there are streets that sort of become parking lots, there are streets that end in parking lots, and some parking lots are in the interior block and some seem to be on the exterior of the block. So it's just, there's a little bit of I think clarity that in the hierarchy of that could really benefit how this is all read. Yeah, and I think at this stage, I mean that kind of I think that kind of covers my I would like those 5 or 6 points. I think they're all worth like tests in various levels and sort of seeing where they lead. And I think you're early enough in your process that it's not at this level of massing it. You could do them very quickly and just test them out. But anyways, I think I'll end there. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Sharon, what are your comments for the team?
Thanks. Well, I wanted to recommend studying University Village in Seattle. I think it's a great precedent. They were able to succeed in including quite a bit of parking, but it still feels very pedestrian-centric. It's still very inviting. And the way they accomplish this is by creating larger pedestrian zones that are really immersive experiences, and then they are very well linked to each other. So pedestrians can move through the entire center, the entire district, in these very safe and pleasant spaces. And you're moving through and around parking still, but it just feels a lot more comfortable and a lot more inviting. The way those spaces are linked and programmed become very vibrant as a result, because people actually want to come, they want to stay. So there's actually a great deal of economic value in creating spaces like that, because you see people, they want to go just to hang out there. You see teens, you see older folks. And so that's great that you're actually keeping people there. And if they want to eat or buy something, they're there. So it's a great example. And I think there's opportunity to do something similar here. And just picking up on some things that some of the other panelists mentioned is just a strategic placement and scale of the green open spaces. So where do people want to be, as opposed to using some leftover corners once you've done your building massing and making those the green spaces. It's being much more intentional about the placement of it and thinking about movement through the space. Until Kevin's comment just now, I didn't understand the purpose behind the plaza up there in the northeast corner. It seems a bit isolated. It doesn't seem like it's in the middle of the activity. I can see as a entry point, as Kevin pointed out, again, if you integrate it intentionally as part of an open space system that is well linked, so that even means the streetscapes, 4-foot wide tree boxes I saw in the sections, that's the absolute minimum that you can have to have sufficient soil volume for good canopy trees. And you're going to really want really healthy canopy trees in here, especially since you have to have the parking. So you want a really good multi-layered vegetation plan. So, and everything needs to thrive to feel like you're in a comfortable, pleasant space and not in a parking lot or on the edge of a parking lot the entire time. And if you look at the plan as it exists now, you're either in the parking lot or on the edge of the parking lot almost everywhere here. So where are the pedestrian zones that make you feel like you're not in a parking lot? So that was my, I think main emphasis is that public open space system and creating that very intentionally, but then also connectivity. And I think that was Osborne's one of his main points. But I agree, we really need to emphasize this, and especially with the B&O Railroad Museum, whether it's the visual connection or the physical connections, pedestrian, vehicular, acknowledging the programs there. The Polar Express event is very, very popular.
Yeah.
I and my family have been, and that's actually along that route that we're talking, along the southern edge of the site, and it's a lot of fun. It's magical, and embracing those kinds of programs and seeing how that unique opportunity might inform the design here, because I know the museum does a lot of interesting events, and so how can you connect to those? It's a great opportunity. Not everybody gets that adjacency. And then connectivity as it pertains to multimodal transportation and bringing those bike lanes in. Right now they're stopping at the edges, bringing them in and through, as many of them as possible. Baltimore's such a great bike lane city in many areas. Connections to bike share, and maybe creating a bike share station in the community, connecting that way. The wider context, rails to trail systems or other trail systems in Baltimore, are there opportunities to bring them through and to this community, and increasing the connectivity in the wider urban context. Acknowledging the public transportation everywhere it exists. Are there more opportunities to create more stops with higher ridership possibility with more residents? So that, again, we have connectivity with through public transportation. And then finally focusing on the entry points to the community and how they connect to the wider urban fabric, especially, as I asked about before, at Arlington. Again, is there an opportunity to create something special there that unites the B&O Railroad and this new community, and create something special and interesting, and gives you some interesting options to peel off that various options? And it can be an amenity and an asset to both facilities. And I believe those are my main points.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, very much. I do have some more left that are along the lines of what you're hearing. Some are going to reinforce some ideas, and maybe a few more to add on. From my very initial kind of thoughts on things, and to follow up from Sharon's comments, the green space overlay in this project is really, really important. And that was one of my comments towards LA for the stage, is that I'd like to see a lot more ideation happen this early, because I think it will inform the project in good ways, to the point to which, like, if these certain legs of things of the buildings can push in and out, maybe they get longer on one side, shorter on the other, because of a specific, idea and how these things connect and how they present themselves to public realm. Now is the time to do it. So don't delay that. I think it's really important to make that happen. To that end, one of my main concerns was that in the end of the day, the buildings are placed, first the roads were drawn, the buildings are placed, the parking is laid out, and then whatever's left is the green space. And if that's okay, kind of in that order of things, I think now is the time to kind of look at what we're left green space wise, make it better, make it more intentional, more connective, and then push back a little bit, working the same way back into the buildings. You will not compromise. I think in the end, you will end up getting both, that what you want. But for example, right now, the space along the railroad tracks is just an idea, a great idea. But there's nothing in the plan yet, even anticipating for that, as the building corners and edges and parking lot touch to your very edge. And you don't need a ton of space to really dedicate and commit now that there is either a trail that goes around it and starts to connect things, and it can have pinch points kind of in between things, but there's nothing right now that really says, okay, we can work with this, and this can become something very special. I realize it's early, I realize it's gonna be developed more, but I want to make sure it doesn't get lost, because there will be other agenda that is going to continue to push along that edge. But looking at examples now and seeing what works and how we can do it within a very tight space is going to help you in these very early planning stages. Similarly, when I look at some of the internal portions of the block, where the parking comes just to the edge of the building, we're currently planned maybe with a 5-foot planting strip and a 5-foot sidewalk, if that, and then all of the kind of cars are parking against the windows of units. I feel like that's too. I don't know what's a good. Okay, I'm not going to call it things, but coming out of the gate this early in the design, I think you need to be more generous and let constraints later on push in a little bit if it's going to end up being that. But right now I'm realizing that if you just remove 4 parking spaces in the north-south direction from your internal parking lots along Carey Street apartment buildings, you will gain another 9 feet of space, green space against the building, which could become little patios out of those units. It infinitely starts to increase the quality of life of these units and the sense of community, and it costs you 4 parking spaces. And I'd rather start there right now, kind of in this like very diagrammatic thing, and let them go away later if you really need those 4 parking spaces. But I guarantee you, in the long range of things, you may not come back looking for them, but you will have such a better kind of communal, kind of residential experience. So I would like to, now that sort of the buildings have been laid out, you've solved quite a bit for this like really complicated site and condition. Clearly, there's a lot of things to refine and continue to solve through, but I think it has to be approached now from the other perspective of what actually will make this, will bring quality of life and will really make it better. So some of it is to become more intentional about the green space, define it typologically, use different crayon colors, like what's simply a green edge 5 foot against the building, what is an actual occupiable space with a different, that's maybe 10 feet or 12 feet, and then what is kind of a more gathering space. I think starting to wrap your head around is it's what Sharon is telling you. It will result in a network, and then it will have some of these typological things. You don't have to design any of it. You don't have to put a single tree in it and plan it, but you will understand how you're using the space that you have and how with like very little moves like that, you can make it infinitely better. I think it's an important study to do at this time. So the green space piece was a big on my list here. The second one was one of your comments you made about drawing pedestrians from Pigtown and whatnot. I mean, clearly Arlington is one way to connect to it. It's a little bit of a convoluted geometry of the roads there, and then the museum new entry. And I remember from the presentation of the museum and their bus loading, unloading thing, they were really treating Arlington a little bit like a back door because, you park up there and then you walk down, and now there's additional parking on that parking lot. But it's not really by design or by definition a pedestrian street. So it may take longer for that stretch of Arlington to really coalesce as something a little bit more urbane and pedestrian friendly. But when I was looking at the street section you were presenting through there, you were already anticipating, that's the back of house of retail and therefore it's not friendly and we're going to screen it with vegetation and whatnot. But I'm simply questioning, does it have to be the back of house of retail? In this existing condition, your loading dock to the grocery store is along Arlington, but once you redesign and put the residential on top of it, could that come off of the little parking lot that you have the spurt off of Arlington coming there and bring the loading dock on that side, and then that allows you to have infinite kind of either commercial or residential frontage along Arlington, and that may be the phase 2 and really transforms that experience along Arlington. Because the pedestrian experience along that edge isn't currently great, and it will take really redoing the entire grocery store site by virtue of addition and whatever down the way to make that work, I think is why it's even more important to connect Carlton to Austin Street. Austin Street takes you straight into the heart of Pigtown and beyond, all the way to Fed Hill. And so does Carlton. Carlton runs, all the way up, I believe, into the market, right? Yeah. So it's what's going to make what is currently a block and a half worth of a commercial driveway. It's what's going to make it into the main street that you want it to be, because it is a big part of your goal and you've been calling it that. So instead of it being a gimmicky retail thing, main street of a block and a half, it would actually become a main street because, it's running through the heart of your development. It's connecting you to the heart of another neighborhood to the north and to the heart of 2 other ones and beyond to the south, connecting you to all kinds of other commercial regions. And it does become part of that connectivity and that network that you're talking about. It's less important to me that it happens on a vehicular level, though I can think of it, and to the extent to which it might disrupt the exhibit of the BNO, I don't know, but I think it's a really important connection to execute properly, at least on the pedestrian level, at minimum. But I think connecting it vehicularly will really give this particular stretch in development that much more significance. It will become a more central hub. Not that they will invite a ton of traffic or anything like that, but the ability to arrive right in the heart of your commercial development is desirable, as opposed to like coming through Cary, snaking around through that signalized intersection, or even trying to snake through Arlington is a very unglorified way to come to Main Street. Main Street really should connect to the rest of it. So I think it's really important to do that. So I realize there's going to be a lot of administrative things kind of in the way, and the BNO has to be on board with it. So there's a lot of work to be done along that. But the very minimum you can show at this end is reconfiguration of the multifamily building that's standing in the way, so that there is an opportunity for that connection to happen, if that's possible. And if it's not, it can stay a parking lot in between. But I think there's a realignment that needs to happen, so that perhaps where you have a U right now at the end of Carrollton there, it might end up being just a bar building on one side and a very long L on the other. But this would allow Austin to kind of extend and reconnect to Carrollton at some point without you losing square footage or anything like that. But it puts the space for connection where it's supposed to be and not around the building. I think that's really, really important. I think you should really investigate that adjustment. So it gives you everything else you want in terms of retail and residential, but it doesn't prevent from that connection to be worked further down the road, even if it's not in that first phase of development. To that end, I think the north-south connections are definitely, someone talked about hierarchy earlier here. The north-south connections through your site are more significant and more dominant in terms of connection. The east and west clearly aren't. On one side, you have the BNO Museum. On the other hand, both McHenry Street and Ramsey Street only go just a couple more blocks to the left, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 to another retail center. And so, yes, there's a connection needed, and I think you need to refine exactly how that is happening. But from the point of view of connectivity in a kind of a larger network, so that connection there is only on a local level. The north and south connections are a lot more on a district level because they bridge several neighborhoods on end. So I think it's really important to continue to work through those and really strengthen them and plan them for the long run. I think in the long run, this will be a very significant development because this land has been disconnected and never connected for a very long time. So this is a significant piece of work. So the green space, the connections through there, realigning the streets, and then at that point it would stop looking like a shopping center or shopping plaza, and it will really become kind of part of the neighborhood because Carrollton will feel like a street because it will continue through. The last few of my comments and notes that I took here actually go back to the very first slide that you had. Don't move this. I think this is great for context, but the very first slide you showed us, and it's something that I pay attention to when it's on the presentation, when someone takes a moment to talk about it, is the goals. And I think your goals are solid, they're honest, and they're relevant to this project. And I think you're working intensely to reach them. I think some of them at this stage of the development of the project, you're reaching more successfully than others. The ones that I highlighted, I have 5 here that I wanted to talk to you about. I feel are worth kind of even clarifying between the project team and the rest, what that really means and how you want to do it, because I think that's going to give you a key to actually getting there. So those are the few that I feel like can continue to evolve kind of as an understanding, because they're kind of hard to find in here yet. The first one was about building community with mixed use retail, and the important thing here to mention is that you don't need retail to build community, but retail adds a very important amenity into how you build community. So it's really important to understand, and that goes a little bit to the point about bringing examples, both from your own work and others that you really believe in and you think are essential to what this means. You will need to, craft this very carefully, because in the end you're creating a vision here. Once you solve the square footages and the street grids and the parking and all that, and you're very close to that with a few iterations, The next question will be then, what is this? What kind of community are you creating? And simply having like storefronts and umbrellas and chairs outside is the bare minimum, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't guarantee you community, right?
Right.
So it's important as you start to bring examples and start to think about what are those key things, if I'm to stick my finger into 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, are what a mixed use retail community start to look like in this context. I think I'm not clear yet. I know kind of what some of the other ones you've designed are like. They're different and they're not the same as the context you have here. So it's really important to clarify that. And I think it will naturally start to answer a lot of the questions of how the rest is designed and addressed. The other one is the variety of diverse housing types. And this probably is more of a matter of semantics than anything else. But so far, what I'm seeing on the plan is only one housing type, at least the way it's visualized, and that's a multifamily, double-loaded hallway, 4-story. That's just one type. I think the things that you referenced earlier in terms of they seem to be more like different products in terms of affordability and things like that, which is wonderful and it's great to see. But I'm actually interested in seeing more variety of the housing types. And I realize you're not proposing here townhouses or anything like that. So that it's still going to stay in some kind of a stacked version of things. But to the extent to which you were mentioning stoops connecting along Carey, and I was maybe visualizing like these little patio units off of the internal courtyards parking so that they feel a little bit more communalized. I'm wondering if there are specific types that could be perhaps these 2-story units that are on the first 2 levels and then apartments above. Please explore that. I think that's really truly where you're going to start to bring diversity of housing types in addition to the various affordability levels. If you have a very clean and efficient framework within which you're working, and I think you can build more richness in it by allowing for additional types to come in, because that will naturally bring units for families, units for singles, units for couples and for roommates and for all of that, right, that are not just your apartment unit on a double loaded hallway. The connection to the neighborhood is what we talked about. I think it's really important to create those physical connections, but really working and starting to talk to folks and bring some of that community partners that can really make this feel less of a kind of like a local shopping destination, which it will be great to be. I mean, this is an amazing amenity for the surrounding neighborhoods, but also something very specific to Pigtown and Hollins. I think you have an opportunity, whether around your green spaces or even the type of retail that ends up here that could be really significant. The Central Plaza activation has been talked about, and the location of the green space is really important. I would put this in the bucket of like bring us examples. There's certain things that the little green at Canton Crossing does, and there's certain things that it doesn't. Some of it has to do with the fact that there's roads around it and whatnot. So I think the more you can bring even from your work, I know you've designed a variety of these different gathering spaces in retail environments. I think it will be important to see kind of what could work here, but also from a precedent perspective. Those are really the proof of concepts that are needed here. It will be really helpful for everybody and to, get more supportive for the ideas. And it was mentioned in last one in the presentation was recreational activities for the residents. It was in your goals. I think it's really important to again to be intentional about it. As it stands right now, there's very little outdoor space for the residents. Most of it is taken by cars. I realize you need to park folks. And other than the little town green, there really isn't much of a recreational space. And I know you're going to try to carve it out and steal it out of everything else that we have left on the site. But it's really important, obviously. And so I look forward to seeing creative ideas of how that can be accomplished. You don't need a ton. You don't need it in every single building or in every single corner of the development. But if you manage to do it successfully in one area, it will be the most popular place in this whole, development and possibly the surrounding community. So it's important to kind of get the most bang for your buck when it comes to some of these ideas. And, if it means, slightly compromising one thing or another, I think it's important to accomplish that. Like I'm eyeing that plaza right there between the two existing buildings that you're maintaining and, you know, the B&O Railroad Museum connection there. I mean, I don't know if you need that big of a plaza. What is the programming there? Like, what could happen? Could that be like a big green, and can it be programmed with various community events? Maybe that's what you have in mind. But I think getting that level of specificity is extremely important, and it will help the overall plan. Okay, we're only 10 minutes over, but I think we managed to get through a lot. We really appreciate you sharing your work today. We really appreciate all of the work that's gone into it. I think everyone froze. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. It's just my screen for a moment froze.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is that that utility line that came through between 25 and now did the project a huge favor. I think it forced you to break down the blocks. There were some really large buildings, kind of mega blocks before, and you've worked it very skillfully. I realize it's not an easy thing. It's happened before. Like you just think you figured something out, and then the diagonal line comes through the property, and you start all over. But I think in many ways, by having to work through it, it has forced you to kind of break the scale down into something that's more compatible, perhaps, and manageable with respect to the context. So I'm very optimistic and excited to see where you take it from here. I think it's in a good overall direction, and we've already outlined a number of different ways in which it can get richer and more successful. So thank you again for your work and for sharing this with us. With that, I'll hand it over to the planning department and see if there's any additional comments from them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much to the panel for these comments. We've got a lot of notes here. Bob, if you could send me the current version of this presentation. I know there have been some edits since we saw it last week. And then I will provide to you just the notes and minutes from this meeting so that you can use that as we go forward. And that's about all we had. Appreciate everybody staying a few minutes extra, and we look forward to seeing this project evolve and grow and become the great project that we think it can be. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for all your insight, and I love all the great ideas, and it leaves us with more energy than when we came into it and stuff, and so I think that's a great outcome.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Have a great one.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.